She stood in the crowded airport terminal with her boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand, exhaustion tugging at her bones after a sleepless night, yet her eyes kept drifting toward the man standing a few feet away, a father holding a small child who had long since fallen asleep against his chest. The airport was alive with motion, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, hurried footsteps, but around him there was a quiet heaviness, the kind that comes from carrying more than just luggage. His jacket was slightly wrinkled, his eyes ringed with fatigue, and his grip on the child was careful, protective, as if letting go for even a second might cause the world to crack. The little girl's curls rested against his shoulder, her tiny fingers knotted into his coat, and every so often he shifted his weight to keep her comfortable, even though it clearly strained his arms. She overheard him speaking softly to the gate agent, explaining that his original flight had been delayed, then cancelled, and that this was the last flight out for the night. The agent's practiced smile didn't soften as she explained there were no seats left. The man nodded without protest, thanked her politely, and stepped aside, his shoulders sagging just a little more. Something in that moment stirred inside her. She thought of her own long day, her own desire to get home, but also of the child who would wake up soon, confused and cranky, and the father who would have to figure out where to sleep in a noisy airport. She looked down at her boarding pass again. Seat 14A. A good seat. A ticket she had paid for with money she couldn't easily spare. Yet the weight in her chest grew heavier with every second she hesitated. Finally, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward and spoke to the agent, her voice calm but resolute, offering her seat to the man and his child. The father turned toward her in surprise, his eyes widening as if he hadn't heard correctly. She smiled, a small, tired smile, and told him she could take a later flight, that she was traveling alone, that he clearly needed it more. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he shook his head, insisting he couldn't accept, that it was too much. But she pressed the ticket into his hand anyway, gently tucking it between his fingers, telling him that kindness only mattered if you let it pass through you. The agent processed the change, and just like that, the decision was irreversible. The man thanked her again and again, his voice thick with emotion, while the child stirred and blinked sleepily, her gaze meeting the woman's for a brief second before she nestled back into her father's shoulder. As they boarded, the woman watched them disappear down the jet bridge, a strange mix of relief and uncertainty washing over her. She found an empty seat near the gate, bracing herself for a long night at the airport, wondering if she had been foolish or if she would regret this generosity later. Hours passed slowly. The terminal grew quieter, lights dimmed, and she wrapped her coat around herself, scrolling aimlessly on her phone. Just as fatigue began to pull her into a shallow sleep, she heard her name over the loudspeaker. Confused, she stood and approached the counter, where a different agent greeted her with an unusual level of respect. She was escorted to a private lounge she didn't even know existed, offered food and a seat, and told that accommodations had been arranged for her, along with a first-class ticket on the earliest flight the next morning. Before she could ask why, the men from earlier walked in, now without the child, who she learned was resting comfortably in a private cabin on board the plane. He looked different somehow, not in his clothes, but in the way he carried himself now that the immediate crisis had passed. He thanked her again, but this time there was something more in his voice. He introduced himself, explaining that he was the CEO of a global technology company, returning from an emergency meeting overseas, traveling quietly to avoid attention. He told her that what she had done wasn't small, that kindness at the exact right moment could change the course of someone's life, even someone who had money, power, and options. He insisted on helping her, not as repayment, but as an extension of the same kindness she had shown him. She listened in stunned silence as he spoke about opportunities, scholarships, connections, things she had only ever dreamed of. Yet what stayed with her most wasn't the revelation of his wealth or status, but the humility in his eyes, the way he spoke about his daughter, about how success meant nothing if you couldn't show compassion when it mattered. By the time the sun rose and she boarded her new flight, upgraded and cared for in ways she had never experienced before, she understood something profound, that the world has a way of quietly rewarding the good you put into it, often when you least expect it. Her single act of selflessness had rippled outward, touching lives far beyond that airport gate. And as the plane lifted into the sky, she smiled to herself, knowing that even if nothing else had come of it, she would make the same choice again without hesitation. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of simple kindness, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because every subscription helps us bring you more real, emotional, and life-changing stories like this, stories that prove even the smallest decision can change everything.